The gray sky hung low over Black River, a heavy blanket of unspent rain that trapped the metallic scent of the valley against the earth. It was a cold November afternoon, the kind that seeped through the layers of a coat and settled into the bones, reminding everyone that winter in this part of Ohio was not just a season, but a trial of endurance. The city itself seemed to be holding its breath. The silent assembly lines of the old auto plant stood like forgotten monuments against the gloom, many of them long since dormant. Jack Corbin shifted the gears of his battered pickup truck as he navigated the potholed asphalt of Main Street. The vehicle's suspension protested with a groan that matched the weary atmosphere of the town. Jack was a man who took up space even when he was sitting still. At 32, he possessed the broad shoulders and disciplined posture of a Navy SEAL, his movements efficient and deliberate. His dark hair was kept short, and his eyes, a piercing shade of hazel, scanned the street with a vigilance that had been forged in deserts and jungles far away from this rusting Ohio town. He had not been back to Black River in 4 years, not since the funeral, and the changes were subtle but unsettling. There were more boarded-up windows than he remembered, and the people walking the sidewalks kept their heads down, their shoulders hunched, not just against the wind, but as if bearing an invisible weight. Jack was here for peace, a few weeks of leave to fix up his father's old cabin on the ridge. But as he turned onto the road leading out of town, the knot of tension in his gut told him that peace might be harder to find than he had hoped. Inside the brick walls of the Black River Sheriff's Department, the heating system clanked and hissed, fighting a losing battle against the drafty windows. Deputy Kate Riley sat at her desk, a solitary island of organization in a sea of chaotic paperwork. Kate was in her mid-30s, a woman of striking resilience with intelligent blue eyes and honey blonde hair pulled back into a practical, no-nonsense ponytail. She wore her uniform with a pride that was becoming rare in the department, her badge polished to a shine that reflected the fluorescent lights overhead. Curled beneath her desk was Max, a massive 5-year-old German shepherd. He was a majestic animal with a thick coat of black and deep tan and eyes that held a soulful, almost human understanding. Max was not just a tool for the force. He was Kate's partner, her shadow, and often the only one she trusted in a building full of shifting allegiances. He let out a low sigh, resting his heavy head on Kate's boot, sensing her frustration before she even voiced it. Kate was staring at a file labeled Thorne Enterprises, the edges of the paper worn from how many times she had thumbed through them. The evidence was there, buried in shell companies and shipping manifests, a clear trail of money laundering that bled the town dry, but every time she got close, a witness disappeared or a file was misplaced. "You're staring at that file again, Riley." A gruff voice broke her concentration. Sheriff Brody stood in the doorway of his office, a man whose once imposing frame had softened with age and compromise. He held a styrofoam cup of coffee, his face lined with the exhaustion of a man trying to keep a sinking ship afloat. "I told you to drop it. We don't have the resources to chase ghosts." Kate slowly closed the folder, her hand resting on Max's neck as the dog sat up, alert to the tension in the room. "It's not a ghost, Sheriff," Kate replied, her voice steady but edged with steel. "It's Caleb Thorne. He's running narcotics through the trucking lines and washing the cash through the renovation projects downtown. You know it, and I know it." Brody sighed, looking away from her intense gaze. "What I know is that the Thorne family built half this town's infrastructure. You go poking the bear, Kate, and you're going to get bit. Or worse. Just focus on patrol. Leave the heavy lifting to the feds if they ever decide to show up." He turned and went back into his office, closing the door with a finality that echoed in the quiet room. Kate clenched her jaw. She knew what that meant. There would be no backup, no support. She was on her own. Jack pulled his truck into the gravel lot of Henderson's Hardware and Feed. He needed lumber and nails to start on the porch, a simple task to clear his mind. As he stepped out, the cold air bit at his face. He walked inside, the bell above the door jingling with a nostalgic sound. Old Mr. Henderson was behind the counter, looking frailer than Jack remembered, his skin papery and his eyes darting nervously toward the front window. "Jack, is that you?" Henderson asked, his voice trembling slightly. "It's me, Mr. Henderson," Jack said, offering a rare, soft smile. "Just back for a bit to fix up Dad's place." Before Henderson could respond, the roar of a high-performance engine cut through the air. A sleek black sports car tore down the street, slowing just enough for the driver to look at the hardware store. Jack turned to see the driver. It was a young man, perhaps 25, with slicked-back dark hair and a suit that cost more than Jack's truck. This was Caleb Thorne. Even through the glass, Caleb's expression was one of arrogant ownership. He didn't look like a businessman. He looked like a predator surveying his territory. Henderson flinched visibly behind the counter. "He raised the rent again," Henderson whispered as if the car could hear him. Says it's for protection services. If I don't pay by Friday, I have to close. Jack watched the car speed away, his hands curling into fists at his sides. This wasn't just economic depression. This was extortion. The town wasn't dying. It was being strangled. Back at the station, the sun had set, plunging the office into shadow. Kate was packing up her bag when the phone on her desk rang. It wasn't the official line, it was her direct extension, a number few people had. Max's ears perked up, his body tensing as if he could hear the voice on the other end. Kate picked it up. "Riley," she said. The voice on the other end was distorted, hurried, and low. "Tonight. Midnight. The old Packard plant on the east edge. A shipment is moving. Caleb will be there personally to oversee the transfer. If you want him, this is your only chance." The line went dead before she could ask a question. Kate sat there for a moment, the receiver humming in her hand. It was a classic setup, or it was the break she had been praying for. The old auto plant had been abandoned for a decade, a labyrinth of rusting metal and shadows. Going in alone was against every regulation in the book. But looking at the empty office, knowing the sheriff wouldn't authorize a raid based on an anonymous tip, she realized she had no choice. She looked down at Max. "You ready to go to work, boy?" she whispered. The dog stood instantly, his tail giving a single, determined wag. He was always ready. Jack reached his father's cabin as darkness fully took hold of the mountain. The structure was sturdy but neglected, the wood gray with age. He unlocked the door, the smell of dust and pine welcoming him home. He didn't turn on the lights immediately. Instead, he walked to the window that overlooked the valley. From here, he could see the twinkling lights of Black River and, further out, the dark, gaping maw of the industrial district where the old auto plant stood. He felt a restlessness he couldn't shake, the soldier in him refusing to power down. He had seen the fear in Henderson's eyes, seen the arrogance in Thorne's face. He unpacked his gear, his movements ritualistic. He wasn't looking for a fight, not tonight. But the instincts that had kept him alive overseas were screaming that something was wrong in this valley. He decided he would drive the perimeter of the town just to get a feel for the land, just to settle his nerves. He didn't know that miles away, a police cruiser was turning its headlights off, slipping silently toward the very same darkness he was staring at. The wind picked up, howling through the trees, carrying with it the promise of a storm that was about to break, both in the sky and on the ground. The silhouette of the abandoned Black River auto plant rose against the night sky like the skeletal remains of a prehistoric beast, its rusting conveyors piercing the low-hanging clouds that obscured the moon. The air here tasted of motor oil and stagnant water, a bitter reminder of the industry that had once fed the city before abandoning it to rot. Deputy Kate Riley eased her patrol cruiser over the broken pavement of the access road, the tires crunching loudly on loose gravel and slag. Her knuckles were white as she gripped the steering wheel, every instinct she possessed screaming that this was wrong. The darkness was absolute, swallowing the beams of her headlights just a few yards ahead of the bumper. Beside her in the passenger seat, Max was no longer the relaxed companion who had napped under her desk. He was sitting bolt upright, his ears swiveled forward like radar dishes, a low, vibrating growl emanating from deep within his chest. "I know, buddy," Kate whispered, her hand drifting to the release button on her holster. "I don't like it either. We take a look, we verify, and we get out." She stopped the car near the entrance of the main assembly floor, a cavernous space where shadows seemed to dance in the periphery of her vision. She killed the engine, and the silence that followed was heavy, broken only by the wind whistling through the shattered windows high above. Kate stepped out of the vehicle, the cold dampness of the air hitting her instantly. "Heel," she commanded softly. Max exited the car with fluid grace, pressing his flank against her leg, his body a coiled spring of tension. They moved forward, scanning the gloom. The anonymous tip had been specific: midnight, the loading bay. But the loading bay was empty. There were no trucks, no crates, no Caleb Thorne. Just the echo of their own footsteps. "It's a bust," Kate muttered, reaching for her radio to call it in. "Dispatch, this is Riley, 10-4 at the plant. Negative contact. I'm clearing the..." Before she could finish the sentence, the world exploded into blinding white light. High-intensity floodlights rigged onto the surrounding girders snapped on simultaneously, bleaching the night into a harsh exposure that seared Kate's retinas. She threw her arm up to shield her eyes, her other hand drawing her service weapon, but she was too late. "Drop it, officer," a voice boomed from the glare. Shapes detached themselves from the shadows behind the pillars. 3 men. They were big, moving with the heavy, confident gait of hired muscle who knew they had the upper hand. The one in the lead was a giant of a man named Vance. He stood nearly 6 feet 5 inches with a shaved head and a neck so thick it consumed his jawline, wearing a heavy leather jacket that creaked as he moved. He held a tire iron loosely in his right hand, tapping it rhythmically against his thigh. "Max, watch!" Kate shouted, backing toward the cover of her cruiser, but the trap had been sprung from all sides. 2 more men appeared from behind the vehicle, cutting off her retreat. Vance lunged. Kate didn't hesitate. "Max, hit!" The German Shepherd launched himself like a missile. He didn't bark. He simply acted. He hit the first man on the left, a thug in a gray hoodie, with 90 pounds of kinetic force, his jaws locking onto the man's forearm. The man screamed, flailing as he went down, his pistol skittering across the concrete. Max didn't linger. He released and spun, snapping at the second attacker, who was trying to flank Kate. The dog was a blur of teeth and fur, a whirlwind of protective fury. He drove the second man back, snarling, forcing him to drop his weapon. Kate fired 2 shots, not to kill but to suppress, the bullet sparking off the metal pillar near Vance's head. "Back off!" she screamed, but Vance was relentless. He ignored the gunfire, using the distraction of his falling comrades to close the distance. He swung the heavy iron tool with brutal, practiced efficiency. The blow wasn't meant for Kate. It was meant for the threat. As Max turned to defend his handler from the charging giant, the tire iron caught him mid-leap. The sound was sickening, a dull, wet thud of heavy steel impacting rib and muscle. A sharp, high-pitched yelp tore from Max's throat, a sound so full of pain it stopped Kate's heart. The dog was thrown sideways, crashing hard against the jagged remnants of a conveyor belt. He tried to rise, his front paws scrambling for purchase, but his back legs gave way, and he collapsed, wheezing, blood frothing slightly at his muzzle. "No!" Kate shrieked, her focus shattering. She turned her weapon toward Vance, but the split second of distraction cost her everything. A heavy boot kicked the gun from her hand, breaking her finger with a sickening snap. Before she could reach for her backup weapon, a fist slammed into the side of her head. The world tilted violently, stars burst in her vision, and the ground rushed up to meet her. She felt the cold concrete against her cheek, tasted copper in her mouth, and then the darkness took her. The last thing she heard was Max's labored, shallow breathing. A mile away on the old perimeter road that wound through the dense pine forest overlooking the plant, Jack Corbin was fighting the wheel of his pickup truck. He wasn't just buying materials, he was hauling a load of lumber and drywall he had purchased earlier that afternoon from Henderson's, taking the long, bumpy route home to test the truck's suspension and clear his head. The solitude of the drive usually calmed him, but tonight the air felt charged. He had the window down, letting the freezing air numb his face when he heard it. Pop pop. 2 distinct sounds, flat and dry, carrying over the wind. To a civilian, it might have been a car backfiring. To a Navy SEAL, it was unmistakable, small arms fire, 9mm likely, followed by a shout. Jack didn't gasp. He didn't panic. His training overrode his conscious thought. He instantly killed the headlights of his truck, plunging the cab into darkness. He pulled the vehicle off the road, guiding it deep into a cluster of overgrown brush to hide the chrome bumper. He killed the engine. Silence returned to the forest, but Jack was already moving. He exited the truck, not slamming the door but clicking it shut with gentle pressure. He moved through the trees, not like a hiker but like a predator, his footsteps silent on the damp pine needles. He wore dark jeans and a black canvas jacket, blending perfectly into the night. He reached the ridge overlooking the plant just in time to see the scene unfolding below under the harsh glare of the floodlights. He saw the woman on the ground. He saw the dog, unmoving. And he saw the men standing over them. He assessed the tactical situation instantly, 4 hostiles visible, the leader not clearly armed, but the others were. He had no gun, only the K-bar knife strapped to his belt and the element of surprise. He began to descend the slope, a shadow moving among shadows. Down on the concrete floor, consciousness returned to Kate in a wave of nausea. She tried to move, but her hands were wrenched behind her back, cold steel handcuffs biting into her wrists. She was propped up against the tire of her own squad car. Her head swam and her vision was blurry, but she could see Vance standing nearby, wiping something off his tire iron. "Wakey, wakey, officer." A smooth, arrogant voice drifted down to her. Kate looked up. Stepping out of a pristine black SUV that had pulled up silently during her blackout was Caleb Thorne. He looked startlingly out of place in the grime of the plant. He wore a tailored camel hair coat over a dark suit, his Italian leather shoes shining under the floodlights. He held a handkerchief over his nose as if the very air of the place offended him. "You really are a nuisance, Kate," Caleb said, his voice bored, lacking any heat. "My father respects the badge, you know. He says we should work with the local talent. But you just don't know how to take a hint. He walked over to where Max lay. The dog let out a low, gurgling growl, trying to lift his head, his eyes locked on Caleb. Caleb looked down at the animal with a sneer of disgust. And this beast, filthy thing. He kicked dirt into Max's face. Max didn't flinch. He just watched, storing the face of his enemy. Don't you touch him, Kate rasped, struggling against the cuffs, her voice thick with pain. You touch him again and I swear I'll kill you. Caleb laughed, a dry, humorless sound. You're in no position to make threats, darling. You're barely in a position to breathe. He turned to Vance. Is it done? Vance nodded, gesturing to the other men. Boys are ready, boss. Two of the henchmen stepped forward, hefting large red plastic jerry cans. The smell hit Kate instantly. Acrid, volatile, terrifying. Gasoline. Load them up, Caleb commanded, checking his watch as if he had a dinner reservation to catch. Put the dog in the back. Put her in the front driver's seat. Pour it everywhere. The upholstery, the dashboard, their clothes. Vance grabbed Kate by her hair, dragging her up. She fought, kicking and thrashing, but she was dizzy and outnumbered. They shoved her into the driver's seat of her cruiser. She watched helplessly as they grabbed Max by his collar and hind legs, tossing him roughly onto the back seat like a sack of garbage. The dog groaned, a sound of pure misery, but managed to lick the wire mesh separating him from Kate. The henchman uncapped the cans. The gurgling sound was deafening in the silence. Cold, stinging liquid splashed over Kate's uniform, soaking into her hair, burning the cut on her forehead. The fumes were overwhelming, making her gag. They doused the back seat, soaking Max's fur. The car became a bomb, waiting for a spark. Caleb stepped closer, the floodlights reflecting in his dark eyes. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a silver Zippo lighter. He flipped the lid open with a metallic clink. A tragic accident, Caleb mused, staring at the small flame that sprang to life. Officer loses control during a patrol. Crashes into the old plant. Fuel line ruptures. Whoosh. So sad. Closed casket, obviously. He smiled, a cruel, boyish grin that didn't reach his eyes. He held the flame up, watching it dance. Kate looked at the flame, then back at Max in the rearview mirror. The dog's eyes met hers, full of trust and pain. She wasn't afraid of dying. She was afraid of failing him. High above on the catwalks, unseen and unheard, Jack Corbin tightened his grip on the railing, his eyes locking onto the flame in Caleb's hand. The air inside the abandoned plant was no longer just stale with industrial decay. It was a volatile, suffocating blanket of high-octane death. The fumes were so thick they distorted the air, creating a shimmering haze under the harsh floodlights that turned the scene into a surreal, chemically saturated nightmare. Gallon after gallon of gasoline had been emptied over the white patrol cruiser, the liquid pooling in the footwells, soaking the upholstery, and dripping rhythmically from the door frames onto the cracked concrete floor. Inside the vehicle, Deputy Kate Riley slumped forward, her forehead resting against the steering wheel, a dark trickle of blood matting her blonde hair. Her wrists were encased in steel, handcuffed through the steering wheel itself, trapping her in the driver's seat. She drifted in and out of consciousness, the pain in her head a dull throb compared to the stinging burn of the fuel on her skin. In the back seat, separated by the wire mesh, Max lay on his side. The proud German shepherd was breathing in shallow, ragged gasps, his ribs rising and falling with agonizing slowness. Despite his pain, despite the crushing blow he had taken to his flank, he pushed his muzzle against the mesh, his tongue extending to lick the back of Kate's neck, a desperate, silent attempt to wake his handler, to comfort her in what felt like their final moments. From the rusted catwalk 20 feet above, Jack Corbin watched the scene with the cold, detached precision of a predator. He had lowered himself into a crouch, his silhouette merging with the darkness of the heavy machinery. His breathing was slow and controlled, a stark contrast to the adrenaline flooding his system. He did the math, the grim calculus of violence that had been drilled into him over a decade of service. 4 hostiles, 1 principal target. The leader, the massive man named Vance, stood near the front of the car, wiping his hands on a rag. 2 younger henchmen, jumpy and eager, were flanking the rear bumper, kicking at the gasoline puddles. And then there was Caleb Thorne. The boss's son stood 10 yards away, safely out of the splash zone but close enough to enjoy the show. He was toying with the silver Zippo, flipping the lid open and closed, the metallic clink, clink, clink echoing like a ticking clock in the silent plant. Jack touched the hilt of the K-bar knife on his belt. He had no firearm. A gunshot here would be catastrophic. A single spark from a muzzle flash or a ricochet off the concrete could ignite the fumes instantly. This had to be done with hands, blades, and silence. Jack moved. He didn't run. He flowed. He descended the rusted maintenance ladder with silent speed, his boots finding purchase on the rungs without a sound. He reached the ground floor behind a stack of rotting shipping crates, putting him 20 feet from the nearest guard, a wiry man with a neck tattoo who was nervously scanning the darkness behind the floodlights. This was Ricky, a low-level enforcer known more for his cruelty than his skill. Ricky turned, sensing movement, but he was too slow. Jack surged from the shadows, clamping a hand over Ricky's mouth and driving him into the shadows of the crates. There was a brief struggle, a muffled grunt, and then silence as Jack applied a sleeper hold, rendering the man unconscious in seconds. He lowered the body gently to the ground. 1 down, 3 to go. The odds were shifting, but the timeline was collapsing. Caleb Thorne checked his watch, his patience wearing thin. "All right, that's enough marinating," he called out, his voice echoing off the metal walls. "Vance, get the boys back. I don't want any of you catching fire when this goes up. It's going to be a big one." Vance grunted an affirmative and signaled the other 2 men to retreat toward the SUVs. They moved back, leaving the car isolated in its pool of accelerant. This was the opening Jack needed, but it was also the moment of greatest danger. With the guards moving away, the line of sight to Caleb was clear, but the distance was still too great. Caleb stepped forward, a look of ecstatic anticipation on his face. He held the Zippo up, his thumb resting on the flint wheel. "Goodbye, Deputy Riley," he whispered, the words carrying on the still air. "Give my regards to the devil." Jack broke cover. He abandoned stealth for pure, explosive speed. He was a blur of black canvas and focused fury, sprinting across the gap between the crates and the center of the floor. Vance saw him first. "Boss, look out." The giant roared, reaching for the pistol tucked in his waistband. But Jack wasn't aiming for Vance. He was a guided missile locked onto Caleb. Caleb turned, his eyes widening in shock as he saw the dark figure rushing him. In his panic, his thumb slipped on the wheel. Spark! The tiny orange flint spark flared. It was enough. The flame caught the wick. The Zippo was lit. A small yellow tongue of fire danced in the gloom, terrifyingly bright against the darkness. "Burn!" Caleb screamed, his composure shattering. Instead of throwing it immediately, he hesitated for a fraction of a second, surprised by Jack's speed. That hesitation was his undoing. He pulled his arm back to toss the burning lighter into the pool of gasoline 5 yards away. Jack launched himself into the air. He didn't tackle Caleb's body, he tackled the arm. He collided with the mobster with the force of a freight train, his shoulder driving into Caleb's chest while his left hand slashed out to intercept the throwing motion. The impact was brutal. Air left Caleb's lungs in a wheezing gasp as they both slammed onto the hard concrete. The Zippo flew from Caleb's hand. Time seemed to suspend itself. The laws of physics took over, slowing the world down to a frame-by-frame horror show. Jack, rolling from the impact, looked up. The silver lighter was spinning through the air, end over end, the flame still burning, a tiny beacon of destruction. It was arcing perfectly toward the gasoline-soaked concrete not 3 feet away. If it touched the ground, or even the vapor-heavy air just above the fuel, the plant would become a blast furnace. Kate and Max would be incinerated instantly. Jack didn't think. He didn't stand up. He lunged from his knees, diving forward with every ounce of desperate strength he possessed. His hand was outstretched like a baseball player diving for a game-winning catch. His chest scraped against the rough floor, tearing his jacket. His fingers stretched, straining, reaching. The lighter was 6 inches from the fumes. 5. 4. Jack's hand closed. He felt the hot metal against his palm, the searing bite of the flame against his skin as he snapped his fist shut, suffocating the fire instantly. He hit the ground hard, his fist clenched tight against his chest, sliding on the grit. Silence returned to the plant, heavier than before. No explosion, no wall of fire, just the heavy breathing of men and the smell of unburnt gas. Jack lay there for a heartbeat, his heart hammering against his ribs like a trapped bird. He opened his hand slowly. The Zippo lay there, smoked and hot, but the flame was out. He had caught it. "Kill him!" Caleb shrieked from where he lay, gasping on the floor, clutching his bruised chest. "Kill him now!" Vance and the remaining henchmen recovered from their shock. They raised their weapons, the clicks of safety catches disengaging echoing loudly. Jack scrambled to his feet, pocketing the lighter. He was standing in a pool of gasoline, unarmed, facing 2 gunmen and a furious mobster. He looked toward the car. Kate had lifted her head at the noise, her eyes blurry but focusing on him. She saw a stranger, a man standing between her and death, his hands empty but his stance defiant. Jack didn't look at the guns. He looked at Vance. "You fire that weapon," Jack said, his voice low and gravelly, carrying a terrifying calmness, "and the muzzle flash ignites this whole room. We all die. You want to die for him, Vance?" Vance hesitated. The barrel of his gun wavered. The logic pierced through his blind loyalty. He looked at the gasoline fumes shimmering around Jack's legs. He knew the soldier was right. It was a standoff, but one built on a foundation of liquid dynamite. Jack shifted his weight, his hand drifting back to his knife. The fire was out, but the fight had just begun. The silence in the plant, which had been held taut by the threat of mutually assured destruction, shattered like glass. Caleb Thorne, humiliated and bruised, scrambled backward across the concrete, his face contorted into a mask of pure, irrational fury. The logic of the situation, the pool of gasoline, the fumes, the certain death that a spark would bring, evaporated in the heat of his rage. He pointed a trembling finger at Jack. "Kill him!" Caleb screamed, his voice cracking. "Shoot him. I don't care. Just kill him." Vance the giant hesitated. He looked at the gasoline shimmering around Jack's boots, then at his own weapon. But the second gunman, a younger, twitchy enforcer named Finn, a man with hollow eyes and a nervous tick in his jaw, didn't possess Vance's survival instinct. Panic and obedience short-circuited his brain. He raised his 9mm pistol, aiming not at Jack but blindly into the center of the room. Jack saw the muscle in Finn's finger tighten. "Down!" Jack roared, his voice cutting through the air. He didn't dive for cover. He dove for the car. He grabbed the handle of the driver's side door and wrenched it open just as Finn fired. Bang! The gunshot was deafening in the enclosed space. The bullet missed Jack by inches, burying itself in the leather upholstery of the headrest, dangerously close to Kate's face. The muzzle flash was bright, a terrifying spark in the fume-filled darkness. But miraculously, the air didn't ignite. The concentration of vapor at that specific height wasn't quite rich enough. Or perhaps luck was simply on their side. But Jack knew they wouldn't get a second chance. He reached inside, his hands moving with a surgeon's precision and a blacksmith's strength. Kate was dazed, blinking up at him through a mask of blood and gasoline. "Keys." Jack gritted out. He saw them still in the ignition. He twisted them, pulled them out, and jammed the handcuff key into the mechanism on Kate's wrist. Click. The cuff sprang open. "Move." He grabbed her by the vest, hauling her out of the driver's seat just as Finn fired again. This time, the bullet sparked off the door frame. "Max," Kate gasped, stumbling, her legs refusing to hold her weight. "My dog." Jack didn't stop. He shoved Kate behind a heavy concrete pillar, then spun back to the car. The rear door was locked. He didn't fumble with keys. He used the hilt of his K-bar knife, smashing the small quarter window with a single, precise blow. He reached in, unlocked the door, and threw it open. Max was lying on the floorboard, whining softly. The dog tried to rise, his paws scrabbling on the slick plastic, but his hind legs collapsed. The blow from the tire iron had done serious damage. "I got you, buddy," Jack whispered. He reached in, ignoring the growls of pain from the animal, and scooped the 90-pound German Shepherd into his arms. The weight was immense, dead and shifting. But Jack didn't falter. He turned and sprinted for the pillar, his boots slipping on the gasoline-slicked floor. Bullets began to rain down around them. Vance, seeing that the first shots hadn't blown them all to hell, decided the risk was acceptable. He opened fire, the heavy booming of his .45 caliber handgun joining the cracks of Finn's 9mm. Chips of concrete sprayed into Jack's face as he slid behind the pillar, dropping Max gently next to Kate. "Check him," Jack ordered, his chest heaving. He peeked around the edge of the pillar. They were pinned. The exit, a large sliding metal door on the north wall, was 50 yards away across an open expanse of killing ground. Vance and Finn were advancing, using the shipping crates for cover, closing the angle. Caleb was screaming from the back, urging them forward. His ribs are broken," Kate stammered, her hands trembling as she felt Max's side. The dog was panting rapidly, his gums pale. "He can't walk, Jack. He can't make it." "He's not walking," Jack said grimly. "I'm carrying him." He looked at Kate. "Can you shoot?" I think so. My hand," she looked at her broken finger, swollen and purple. "I can use my offhand." "Good." Jack looked around. He needed a weapon. He saw the unconscious body of Ricky, the guard he had choked out earlier, lying in the shadows just a few feet away. Ricky's gun was still in his waistband. Jack waited for a lull in the firing. "Cover me," he yelled. Kate leaned out, firing 2 rounds with her left hand. Her aim was shaky, but it forced Vance to duck. Jack lunged, rolled to Ricky's body, grabbed the pistol, a Glock 17, and rolled back to cover. Now armed, Jack assessed the tactical board. They couldn't win a sustained firefight. He had limited ammo, an injured civilian, and a crippled dog. He needed a door, but he didn't have one. He needed a distraction. His eyes scanned the loading dock area to his right. A series of high-pressure hydraulic lines ran along the wall, feeding the dormant machinery. One main junction box, rusted but intact, controlled the flow. If he could rupture a line at the manifold, the resulting spray of atomized hydraulic fluid would create chaos. He didn't need fire. He needed a screen. "Cover your ears and eyes," Jack shouted to Kate. He raised the Glock, aimed not at the men, but at the main valve on the hydraulic manifold. He fired 3 rapid shots. Ping! Ping! Clang! The third bullet sheared the rusted valve stem. The result was instantaneous and violent. A jet of high-pressure hydraulic fluid exploded outward with a deafening shriek, atomizing into a thick, oily fog. It wasn't an explosion, but it was a visual and auditory flashbang. The cloud of dark, clinging mist expanded rapidly, filling the space between the shooters and the pillar, obscuring all vision. Now. Jack holstered the gun. He didn't ask Kate if she was ready. He grabbed Max. With a grunt of exertion that corded the muscles in his neck, he hoisted the massive dog onto his shoulders in a fireman's carry. Max groaned but didn't struggle, sensing the man was helping. "Grab my belt if you get dizzy. We run. Don't look back." They broke from cover, diving into the wall of mist. It was thick and wet, blinding them, but it blinded Vance and Finn, too. Bullets zipped blindly through the fog, buzzing like angry hornets, but none found their mark. Jack moved with the relentless drive of a locomotive, the extra 100 pounds on his back grounding him but not stopping him. Kate limped beside him, one hand clutching the back of his jacket, her eyes watering from the fumes. They reached the north door. It was chained shut. Jack didn't hesitate. He kicked the mechanism once, twice, the rusted metal groaning, then drew his pistol and fired a single round into the padlock. It shattered. He kicked the door open and they spilled out into the cold, biting night air of the forest. The transition was shocking. The noise of the hissing fluid and the gunfire faded instantly, replaced by the wind in the pines. "Keep moving," Jack urged, not slowing down. He adjusted Max's weight, ignoring the burning in his own legs. They pushed into the tree line, the undergrowth tearing at their clothes, disappearing into the dense canopy of the Cuyahoga Valley wilderness just as the headlights of approaching vehicles swept across the plant's parking lot. Back inside, the mist began to dissipate. Vance coughed, waving his hand in front of his face, stepping cautiously toward the pillar. It was empty. The back door was swinging in the wind. Caleb Thorne walked through the clearing fog, his Italian shoes ruined by the sludge on the floor. He stopped at the empty spot where his victims had been. His face was no longer red. It was a pale, icy mask of hatred. He looked at the open door, then at the approaching headlights of his reinforcements. A heavy black truck skidded to a halt outside, and a man stepped out. This was Wyatt. He was older, perhaps 50, with skin like cured leather and a jagged scar running from his ear to his chin. He wore hunting camouflage and carried a scoped rifle with the casual familiarity of a man who slept with it. He didn't speak. He just looked at the open door and the tracks in the mud. "They're gone," Vance muttered, holstering his weapon. "No," Caleb said softly, his voice trembling with a deadly promise. "They just started the game." He turned to Wyatt. "I want them found. I want the soldier's head. I want the bitch's badge. And I want that dog skinned." Wyatt walked over to the mud, knelt down, and touched the deep bootprint Jack had left, weighted down by the dog. He looked up at Caleb, his eyes dark and empty. "He's carrying heavy," Wyatt said, his voice like grinding stones. "He's slow. I'll have them by sunrise." The journey up the mountain had been a blur of adrenaline and exhaustion, a grueling trek through ancient logging trails that didn't appear on any modern map. Jack Corbin drove his truck, which he had retrieved after circling back through the dense underbrush by memory alone, navigating the washed-out gravel paths with the lights off, guided only by the faint ambient light of the moon breaking through the storm clouds. They were deep in the Cuyahoga Valley wilderness, a stretch of forest that the locals avoided and the tourists didn't know existed. Finally, the trees parted to reveal a small, sturdy structure made of hand-hewn logs, hunkered down against the wind like a part of the landscape itself. This was his father's cabin, a place that existed outside of time, disconnected from the grid and the corruption of Black River below. Inside, the cabin was cold, smelling of pine needles and dormant wood ash. Jack wasted no time. He didn't turn on the electric lanterns. Instead, he struck a match, lighting the kerosene lamp hanging from the center beam, casting a warm, flickering amber glow over the room. He moved Kate to the worn leather sofa near the stone hearth, covering her with a heavy wool blanket. She was shivering, shock beginning to set in. Next, he carried Max in. The dog was heavy, a dead weight of exhaustion and pain. Jack laid him gently on a thick rug in front of the fireplace, arranging the animal so there was no pressure on his injured side. Max let out a low, whimpering sigh, his eyes half open, glazed with trauma. "Stay with him," Jack murmured to Kate, though she was barely conscious. "I'll be right back." He went to the kitchen, pumping water into a kettle from the hand pump and setting it on the cast iron wood stove. He knelt before the hearth, building a fire with the efficiency of a man who had done it 1,000 times. Within minutes, the dry kindling caught, and the logs began to crackle, sending waves of life-saving heat into the room. Now came the hard part. Jack retrieved his field medical kit from the heavy wooden chest at the foot of his bed. It wasn't a standard first aid box. It was a military-grade trauma kit stocked for deep cover operations. He pulled a wooden chair next to the sofa. Kate's eyes fluttered open as he approached. She flinched, her hand instinctively going for a weapon that wasn't there. "Easy," Jack said, his voice low and steady, the voice of a corpsman calming a wounded Marine. "You're safe. My name is Jack. I got you out." Kate blinked, the panic receding slowly as she registered the fire, the smell of kerosene, and the calm face of the stranger. "Max," she rasped, her throat raw from the gasoline fumes. "He's right there. He's alive," Jack assured her. "But I need to look at you first." He worked with gentle precision. The cut on her forehead was deep, a jagged line from the pistol whip. He cleaned it with antiseptic, ignoring her sharp intake of breath. "I'm going to put a few butterfly closures on this. It doesn't need stitches, but it's close." His hands, rough and calloused, were surprisingly tender. He taped her broken finger, creating a splint. "Concussion protocol," he muttered more to himself than to her. "Keep her awake for a bit." Once Kate was stabilized, Jack turned his attention to the patient who couldn't tell him where it hurt. He knelt beside Max. The dog grew tense, a low rumble vibrating in his throat as Jack touched his flank. "I know, boy. I know it hurts," Jack whispered, letting the dog sniff his hand. He didn't rush. He let Max smell the antiseptic, the blood, and the scent of the man himself. After a moment, Max licked his hand, a gesture of permission. Jack felt the ribs. 2 were cracked, maybe 3. He took a roll of wide, elastic vet wrap from his kit. "Hold him for me," Jack said to Kate, who had sat up and leaned down to stroke Max's head. "It's okay, Max. He's helping," Kate soothed, her voice trembling. Jack worked quickly, wrapping the dog's torso to immobilize the ribs, creating a compression splint that would allow him to breathe but prevent the bones from shifting. Max whimpered once, a high-pitched sound that tore at the room's silence, but he didn't snap. When it was done, Jack injected a mild sedative from his kit into the dog's flank. "That'll help him sleep," Jack said, sitting back on his heels, wiping sweat from his own brow. Time passed in a haze of warmth and recovery. Jack moved to the small kitchenette area. He opened a can of beef stew, dumping it into a pot on the wood stove, adding dried herbs from a jar on the shelf. The smell of rosemary and savory beef soon replaced the lingering odor of gasoline and antiseptic. It was the smell of home, of normalcy. He ladled the soup into 2 ceramic mugs and brought them over. "Drink," he commanded gently, handing one to Kate. "You need the salt and the heat." Kate took the mug with her good hand, the warmth seeping into her frozen fingers. She took a sip, the hot liquid grounding her. She looked around the cabin properly for the first time. It was sparsely furnished but filled with history. Black and white photos of men in hunting gear lined the mantelpiece. A folded American flag sat in a triangular case on the bookshelf. There were no phones, no computers. It was a fortress of solitude. "You're not just a guy buying lumber," Kate said, her voice stronger now. She looked at him, really looked at him. She saw the way he sat, alert, even in relaxation, back to the wall, eyes checking the door. She saw the scars on his forearms. "The way you moved back there at the plant. The way you treated the wound." Jack took a sip of his soup, staring into the fire. "Navy SEAL. Petty Officer First Class Jack Corbin, currently on leave." Kate let out a breath she didn't know she was holding. A SEAL. That explained the silence, the violence, And the competence. Deputy Kate Riley, she replied. And that sleeping giant is K9 Max. She looked down at her dog, who was now snoring softly, the sedative taking effect. Why did you do it? You could have walked away. You don't know me. You don't know what kind of mess this is. Jack turned to her, his hazel eyes reflecting the dancing flames. I saw a woman and a dog in a cage. I saw men with gasoline. I didn't need to know the politics, Riley. I just needed to know the target. He paused, his expression hardening slightly. Besides, I grew up in this town. My dad built this cabin. He taught me that when you see a fire starting, you don't run from it. You put it out. A silence settled between them, but it wasn't the awkward silence of strangers. It was the companionable silence of two soldiers who had survived the same foxhole. Kate felt a strange sensation in her chest. For months, she had been fighting this war alone, isolated by her corrupt sheriff, mocked by the criminals she tried to arrest. She had built walls around herself so high that only Max could climb over them. But sitting here in this rough-hewn cabin with this quiet man, she felt the walls cracking. They're going to come for us, Kate said quietly. Caleb Thorne isn't going to stop. He can't afford to leave witnesses. Let them come, Jack said calmly. This isn't the plant. This is my ground. The rules are different up here. The fire popped, sending a shower of sparks up the chimney. Suddenly, there was a movement on the rug. Max was stirring. The sedative hadn't knocked him out completely. His drive was too strong. He lifted his head, his ears twitching. He looked at Kate, checking her status, and seeing she was safe, his gaze shifted to Jack. Jack stopped drinking his soup. He watched the dog. Easy, partner. Don't get up. Max ignored the command. With a grunt of effort that made Kate wince, the German shepherd dragged his front paws forward. He didn't try to stand, his back legs were too weak. But he pulled his body across the rug, inch by painful inch. Max. No. Kate whispered, reaching for him. But Max had a mission. He crawled until he reached Jack's boots. He sniffed the denim of Jack's jeans, the scent of the man who had carried him through the fire and the mist. Then, with a heavy, deliberate movement, Max laid his massive head squarely on Jack's foot. He let out a long, shuddering sigh, his eyes closing, his entire body relaxing into the contact. Kate froze, her spoon hovering halfway to her mouth. Tears welled up in her eyes, spilling over onto her bruised cheeks. He doesn't do that, she choked out. Max doesn't let anyone touch him but me. He's a working dog. He's aloof. Jack looked down at the animal resting on his foot. He slowly reached out, his hand resting on the dog's thick neck, feeling the steady beat of the pulse beneath the fur. He knows, Jack said softly. Dogs always know. Kate watched the scene, the rugged soldier and the wounded wolf, and felt a profound shift in her world. This man hadn't just saved their lives. He had saved their dignity. He had treated Max not as a piece of property or a tool, but as a fellow warrior. In that moment, amidst the pain and the danger, Kate Riley realized that for the first time in a long time, she wasn't fighting alone. And looking at Jack's hand gently stroking her dog's fur, she knew she would trust him with her life. The days that followed in the cabin were measured not by the clock, but by the slow, rhythmic healing of wounds and the quiet building of trust. Outside, the wind howled through the Cuyahoga Valley, stripping the last of the autumn leaves from the trees, but inside, the atmosphere was one of focused calm. Jack Corbin and Kate Riley fell into a domestic routine that felt surprisingly natural, born of necessity and shared survival. Jack took charge of the logistics, rationing the food and keeping the fire stoked against the biting cold, while Kate, despite her concussion and broken finger, insisted on maintaining the tactical overview. She turned the small kitchen table into a command center, using a notepad Jack had found to map out the Thorne organization's hierarchy. Max was the center of their world. The German shepherd's recovery was slow but steady. The compression wrap Jack had applied supported his cracked ribs, allowing him to stand and walk for short periods, though he did so with a stiffness that pained Kate to watch. He had appointed himself the guardian of the cabin. He no longer slept deeply. Instead, he lay on the rug near the front door, his head resting on his paws, his amber eyes tracking every movement Jack made, every shadow that crossed the window. He had accepted Jack into the pack. When Jack would sit by the fire to clean the Glock 17 he had taken from the plant, Max would often limp over and lean his weight against Jack's leg, a silent gesture of solidarity that spoke louder than any command. On the third evening, the storm outside broke, leaving behind a silence that was heavy and watchful. Kate sat at the table, the warm glow of the kerosene lamp illuminating her pale features. She pushed a piece of paper across to Jack. It's not just about the drugs, Jack, she said, her voice steady. The drugs are just the cash flow. The real game is real estate. Caleb calls it the Black River Revitalization Project. It sounds noble, but it's a scorched earth policy. Jack picked up the paper, studying her handwriting. Explain, he said, pouring 2 mugs of black coffee. They target properties, Kate continued, her blue eyes darkening with anger. Old warehouses, family businesses like Henderson's Hardware, residential blocks that are sitting on prime industrial land. First comes the intimidation. If the owners don't sell, then come the accidents, fires, mostly. The insurance pays out a pittance. The owners leave broken, and Thorne Construction buys the land for pennies on the dollar. I found the shipping manifests for accelerants. I found the payoff schedules for the fire inspectors. I have it all memorized, dates, times, amounts, but Sheriff Brody buried the physical files. Jack took a sip of the bitter coffee, his jaw tightening. So Caleb wasn't just killing you to hide a drug shipment. He was killing you because you figured out he's burning the city down to buy the ashes. Exactly, Kate said. And nobody listens. They think I'm just a grief-stricken cop chasing shadows because, she hesitated, looking down at her hands. Because my husband died in one of those fires 3 years ago. They called it faulty wiring. I know it was Caleb. Jack looked at her, seeing the depth of the pain she carried, the personal vendetta that fueled her relentless pursuit of justice. He reached out, placing his hand over hers on the table. It was a brief, grounding contact. We're not running, Kate, Jack said, his voice low and dangerous. I'm not going back to my unit until this is finished. We take the fight to them. We don't just survive, we dismantle them. The moment was interrupted by a sound. It was low, guttural, and vibrating with menace. Max. The dog was standing by the door, his hackles raised in a rigid line along his spine. He wasn't barking, he was too disciplined for that. But the growl emanating from his chest was a clear biological alarm. His nose was pressed against the crack of the door jamb, inhaling sharply. Jack was on his feet instantly, extinguishing the lamp with a swift puff of breath, plunging the cabin into darkness. Get down, he whispered to Kate. He moved to the window, peering through a slit in the curtains. The moon was out, casting long, skeletal shadows across the clearing. At first, he saw nothing. Then a movement caught his eye near the woodpile, a figure moving low, tactical, not like a hiker or a lost hunter. Someone's here, Jack breathed. Armed. Kate reached for the Glock on the table, wincing as her broken finger protested. Caleb? No. Too quiet for thugs. This is a pro. The figure outside moved closer to the porch steps. The wood creaked, a tiny sound, barely audible. But in the silence of the ridge, it was a thunderclap. Max let out a sharp, warning bark, unable to hold it back. The door burst open. It wasn't kicked. The lock was shot out with a suppressed weapon. Thwip. And the door swung inward. A dark shape filled the frame, a weapon raised. But the intruder hadn't counted on the speed of a seal on his home turf or the ferocity of a wounded guardian. Before the man could step across the threshold, Jack threw a heavy piece of firewood he had grabbed from the hearth. It spun through the dark and connected with the intruder's shoulder with a meaty thud, throwing his aim off. The silenced shot went wide, splintering the doorframe. Simultaneously, Max lunged. He didn't jump for the throat, his ribs wouldn't allow the elevation. But he drove forward and clamped his powerful jaws onto the intruder's ankle, shaking his head violently. The man screamed, a high-pitched sound of shock, and crumbled to one knee. Jack was on him in a heartbeat. He didn't use a weapon. He used leverage. He grabbed the intruder's gun arm, twisted it behind his back until the shoulder joint popped, and slammed the man's face into the floorboards. Don't move. Jack roared. Kate. Lights. Kate fumbled with the matches, relighting the lamp. The yellow glow revealed their attacker pinned beneath Jack's knee. He was dressed in black tactical gear, but beneath the unzipped jacket was a tan uniform shirt. A badge glinted in the lamplight. Deputy Evans, Kate gasped, aiming the Glock at him. Deputy Evans was a man in his 40s with a gaunt, rat-like face and eyes that darted nervously around the room. He was the department sneak, a man known for his gambling debts and his willingness to look the other way. Now, he looked terrified. Call the dog off. Call him off. Evans shrieked. Max was still standing over him, teeth bared inches from Evans's face, a low rumble shaking his entire body. He stays right there, Jack said coldly, pressing his knee harder into Evans's spine. How did you find us? The tire tracks, Evans spat out, wincing in pain. I hunt these woods. I saw the fresh mud turn off. I figured you'd go to ground. Does Caleb know? Jack asked. No. I wanted the bounty. He put a price on your heads. 50 grand each. I haven't called it in yet. Jack grabbed Evans by the collar and hauled him up to a sitting position, though he kept the man's arms pinned. Why is the bounty so high, Evans? What is happening that is so important he needs us dead tonight? Evans hesitated, his eyes flicking to the gun in Kate's hand. Kate stepped forward, her face hard. Tell us, Gary, or I let Max finish what he started. Evans broke. He was a bully, not a warrior. It's the land deal, he blubbered. The big one. The Maple Creek complex. Kate's face went white. Maple Creek? That's the low-income senior housing. There are over 100 elderly people living there. Caleb needs the block cleared by the first of the month for the casino developers, Evans confessed, sweat pouring down his face. Eviction takes too long. He's doing it tonight. The anniversary of the old mill fire. He thinks it's poetic. Tonight? Jack demanded. What time? 2:00 a.m., Evans whispered. When everyone is asleep. They rigged the gas main in the basement. It's going to look like a maintenance failure. Jack looked at the old grandfather clock in the corner. It was 11:30 p.m. They had less than 3 hours. Tie him up, Jack ordered Kate, his voice devoid of emotion. Tight. Gag him. We're leaving. Jack, Kate said, her voice trembling slightly as the magnitude of the threat hit her. We can't stop a gas explosion. We're 2 people and a wounded dog against an army. Jack turned to her, and for the first time, she saw the full, terrifying intensity of the Navy SEAL surface. He wasn't looking at a tragedy. He was looking at a mission. We don't need to fight an army, Kate. We just need to cut the head off the snake. Caleb will be there to watch, won't he? He looked at Evans. Evans nodded weakly. He always watches from the penthouse across the street. Then that's where we go, Jack said, grabbing his jacket. He looked down at Max. You ready for one last fight, partner? Max, hearing the tone, stood up straighter. He ignored the pain in his ribs. He looked at the door, then back at Jack, and gave a sharp, affirmative bark. The alliance was formed. The planning was over. It was time for judgment. The Thorne estate sat perched on the highest hill of Black River, a sprawling architectural display of glass and steel that looked down upon the decaying city like a feudal castle. It was 1:40 a.m., 20 minutes before the gas main at the Maple Creek Senior Living Complex, visible as a cluster of dim lights in the valley below, was scheduled to rupture. Inside the mansion, the mood was celebratory. A private party was in full swing, the bass of expensive stereo systems vibrating through the floor-to-ceiling windows. Waiters in white coats moved through a crowd of local politicians, corrupt union leaders, and business partners, offering champagne paid for with laundered money. In the center of the main study, separated from the party by soundproof glass, sat Elias Thorne, the patriarch of the crime family. He was a man of 60 with silver hair slicked back like a helmet and eyes that were as cold and hard as the steel his grandfather had once smelted. He wore a tuxedo that cost more than Kate Riley made in a year, and he was currently toasting his son, Caleb. On the mahogany desk between them lay the prize, the Black Ledger, a leather-bound book containing the unfiltered history of every bribe, every arson, and every murder committed to build their empire. Jack Corbin, Kate Riley, and Max were not on the guest list. They were currently moving through the shadows of the estate's extensive, manicured gardens. Jack had cut the perimeter power to the surveillance cameras 2 minutes ago, creating a blind spot in the north quadrant. He moved with the fluid, predatory grace of a phantom, his black tactical gear blending into the hedges. Kate followed close behind, her face pale but set in grim determination, her hand resting on Max's back. The dog was moving stiffly, the compression wrap tight around his ribs, but his ears were pinned back and his focus was absolute. He knew the scent of the man inside. He knew the mission. 3 guards at the patio entrance, Jack whispered, signaling Kate to halt behind a marble statue. 2 standing, 1 patrolling. I'll take the patrol. You cover the window. Jack didn't wait for an answer. He waited for the patrolling guard to turn the corner, then slipped out of the darkness. He didn't use lethal force. These were just hired security, not sociopaths like Vance. He used a chokehold, compressing the carotid artery. The guard slumped silently into Jack's arms in 6 seconds. Jack lowered him into the bushes and signaled. They reached the glass doors of the study. Inside, Caleb was laughing, pointing down at the valley at the unsuspecting victim sleeping in Maple Creek. Elias was checking a sleek black remote device on the desk, the detonator for the rigged gas valves. The sight of it made Kate's blood run cold. They weren't just waiting for an accident, they were triggering it manually. Breaching, Jack murmured. He used a glass cutter to score a circle near the lock, popped it with a sharp tap, and reached in to turn the handle. The door slid open with a whisper. They were 5 steps into the room before Elias looked up. The old man's reaction was instantaneous. He didn't scream. He reached for the drawer where his pistol was kept. Intruders. He barked, his voice surprisingly powerful. Police. Don't move. Kate shouted, leveling her Glock at them. Panic erupted. The door to the main party burst open and 2 armed bodyguards rushed in. Jack intercepted them. He was a whirlwind of controlled violence. He didn't have time for a prolonged fight. He used the environment, grabbing a heavy crystal decanter from a side table and hurling it into the face of the first guard, blinding him with scotch and glass. As the second guard raised his weapon, Jack slid across the polished floor, kicking the man's legs out from under him. He followed up with a precise strike to the solar plexus, neutralizing the threat. In the chaos, Caleb didn't fight. He panicked. He grabbed the black ledger from the desk with one hand and his silver Zippo with the other. I'll burn it. He screamed, backing toward the roaring fireplace. I'll burn it all. You get nothing. He wasn't looking at Kate. He was looking at the evidence that could end his life of luxury. He flicked the lighter. The flame sprang to life, dancing dangerously close to the paper. Drop it, Caleb. Kate yelled, but she couldn't fire. Elias was moving now, trying to grab the remote detonator on the desk. Jack was occupied with subduing the guards. Max. Kate screamed. Hit. It was a command that defied the laws of pain. Max, the crippled guardian, didn't hesitate. He saw the fire. He saw the man who had hurt him. He saw the threat. He launched himself from the carpet. He couldn't jump high, his broken ribs screaming in protest, but he didn't need to reach the throat. He needed the hand. Caleb saw the black and tan blur coming and shrieked, swinging his arm back. But Max was faster. His jaws snapped shut on Caleb's right wrist, the hand holding the Zippo. It was a bite fueled by justice. The crunch of bone was audible even over the music from the other room. Caleb howled, a sound of pure agony, and the lighter dropped from his useless fingers. But Max wasn't done. He used his weight to drag Caleb down, away from the fireplace, pinning the man's arm to the floor. Caleb kicked and thrashed, striking Max's injured ribs, but the dog didn't let go. He held on with a stoic, ferocious grip, growling deep in his chest, enduring the pain to ensure the capture. Simultaneously, Jack vaulted over the desk. Elias Thorne had his hand on the black remote. He was pressing the sequence code. Jack didn't strike the old man. He grabbed Elias's wrist and twisted, using leverage to force the hand open. The remote clattered to the desk. Jack swept it away, securing it in his pocket, then slammed Elias face down onto the mahogany surface, cuffing his hands behind his back in one smooth motion. It's over, Elias, Jack growled, leaning close to the old man's ear. The gas stays off. Kate rushed forward, kicking the Zippo away into a corner. She holstered her weapon and pulled out her cuffs. Caleb was sobbing on the floor, held fast by Max. Get him off. Get him off me. Caleb wailed, looking at his mangled wrist. Max, release. Kate commanded softly, her voice thick with emotion. Max opened his jaws immediately. He backed away, limping heavily, his breathing ragged, but he kept his eyes fixed on Caleb. He sat down, guarding his prisoner, blood from Caleb's arm staining his muzzle. Kate grabbed Caleb by his collar and hauled him to his knees. She slapped the cuffs on him, ratcheting them tight, tighter than necessary. She leaned in, her face inches from the man who had killed her husband and tried to burn her dog. Caleb Thorne, she said, her voice cutting through the room like a blade of ice. You have the right to remain silent. Anything you say can and will be used against you in a court of law. She paused, letting the words sink in. You have the right to an attorney. If you cannot afford one, well, looking at this ledger, I don't think that will be a problem. But you're going to need a really good one. The doors to the study were crowded now with party guests staring in horror. Sirens began to wail in the distance, the real police, called by the automated alarm Jack had triggered on his way in. Jack stood up, pulling Elias to his feet. He looked at Kate, then at Max. The dog was trembling slightly from the exertion, but he held his head high. Jack nodded. They had done it. The fire was out. The ledger was safe. And the residents of Maple Creek were sleeping peacefully, unaware of how close they had come to the end. The dawn that broke over Black River following the raid on the Thorne estate was unlike any the city had seen in decades. It wasn't just the sun cresting the industrial peaks, it was the clarity of the air, stripped of the smoke and secrets that had choked the valley for too long. The sirens that had wailed through the night had been replaced by the rhythmic, authoritative slam of heavy black SUV doors. The Federal Bureau of Investigation had arrived, summoned by the digital packet Kate Riley had courageously transmitted moments before the raid began. Leading the charge was Special Agent Davis, a man with the posture of a granite statue and eyes that missed nothing. He was in his 50s, wearing a charcoal suit that seemed impervious to the dust of the estate, and he treated the crime scene with reverent seriousness. He stood in the driveway as Elias and Caleb Thorne, handcuffed and stripped of their arrogance, were led into separate federal transport vans. The Black Ledger, the book Caleb had tried so desperately to burn, was now sealed in an evidence bag, tucked securely under Davis' arm. It was the death knell for the corruption in Black River. The ledger didn't just implicate the Thornes. It wove a web that ensnared city council members, fire inspectors, and even Sheriff Brody, who was escorted out of the precinct in silence, his badge stripped, his head hung low. 2 weeks later, the atmosphere in the Black River Sheriff's Department had transformed. The oppressive gloom that had hung over the bullpen was gone, replaced by a bustle of legitimate activity. Windows that had been shut for years were cracked open, letting in the crisp winter air. Kate Riley sat at what had been the sheriff's desk, though she refused the title just yet. She was acting sheriff, a temporary role that everyone knew would become permanent. Her broken finger was healing, splinted and wrapped, and the cut on her forehead had faded to a thin pink line. She was reviewing the latest reports from the FBI. The Maple Creek complex was safe. The funding for the Black River Revitalization Project had been seized and was being redirected to the victims of the arson fires. For the first time in her career, the paperwork on her desk represented justice, not cover-ups. Beneath the desk on a new orthopedic dog bed lay Max. His ribs were still wrapped, and he moved with a careful, stiff grace, but his eyes were bright. He was no longer the only honest officer in the building. He was the mascot of a department reborn. The glass door of the precinct pushed open, and the room went quiet for a beat, then erupted in respectful nods and murmured greetings. Jack Corbin walked in. He wasn't wearing his tactical gear or the rough work clothes he had worn at the cabin. He was dressed in clean dark jeans, a gray sweater, and a heavy pea coat, carrying a green military duffel bag over one shoulder. He looked like what he was, a soldier returning to the world, yet leaving a piece of himself behind. He walked straight to Kate's desk. Max, smelling the familiar scent of pine and gunpowder that clung to Jack, thumped his tail rhythmically against the floor. He tried to stand, but Jack was there instantly, crouching down to save the dog the effort. "At ease, partner," Jack said softly, scratching the thick fur behind Max's ears. "Save your strength." He looked up at Kate. "It's time." Kate stood up, smoothing her uniform. She felt a sudden, sharp pang in her chest that had nothing to do with her injuries. "The 10:15 a.m. bus to Cleveland?" she asked, her voice tight. "Yeah. Flight leaves out of Hopkins at 1600. Back to base." "My leave is officially burned," Jack replied, a wry smile touching his lips. "I'll drive you," Kate said. It wasn't a question. She grabbed her keys and her coat. "Come on, Max. One last ride." The drive to the Black River bus station was quiet. The town passing by the windows looked different to Kate now. She saw Henderson's Hardware open for business, old Mr. Henderson sweeping the sidewalk with a vigor she hadn't seen in years. She saw the Maple Creek complex still standing, smoke rising from its chimneys, not from fire, but from hearths warming the elderly residents inside. Jack watched it all, too, his hand resting on the dashboard, his hazel eyes taking in the piece he had helped secure. He didn't say much, but the tension that had defined his presence since he arrived was gone. He looked like a man who had finally finished a job. The bus station was an old brick building on the edge of town, a relic of a time when Black River was a booming auto hub. A silver Greyhound bus idled at the curb, its engine humming, exhaust pluming into the cold air. There were only a few passengers boarding. Kate parked the cruiser and they got out. Max, sensing the finality of the moment, began to whine. It was a high, thin sound uncharacteristic of the stoic animal. He pressed his body against Jack's legs, almost tripping him, refusing to give him space. "He knows," Kate said, crossing her arms to hide the tremble in her hands. "He hates goodbyes." I think I do, too." Jack dropped his duffel bag on the pavement. He turned to face them. The wind ruffled his dark hair, and for a moment, the soldier vanished, leaving just a man looking at a woman he admired more than anyone he had ever met. "You did good, Kate," Jack said. "You held the line when no one else would. This town, It's yours now. You earned it. I didn't do it alone, Kate replied, stepping closer. I would be dead in that plant if not for you. Max would be, she couldn't finish the sentence. She looked down at the dog. You saved us, Jack. In every way a person can be saved. Jack knelt down on the cold concrete, ignoring the grime. He was eye level with Max now. The German shepherd licked his face, a frantic, worried grooming. Jack took the dog's head in his hands, staring deep into the amber eyes. Listen to me, Jack commanded, his voice thick with emotion. You watch her, you hear me? You keep her safe. That's your mission until I get back. Stand down, soldier. Max let out a long, shuddering sigh and leaned his forehead against Jack's, a silent transfer of duty. Jack stood up and faced Kate. He didn't offer a handshake. He reached out and took her hand, his calloused fingers wrapping around hers with a warmth that defied the winter chill. I have 18 months left on my contract, Jack said, his gaze locking onto hers. 18 months of deployment, then I'm out. That's a long time, Kate whispered. It is, Jack agreed. But I'm not fixing up that cabin to sell it, Kate. I'm fixing it to live in it. He squeezed her hand. I'm not coming back to visit. When I come back, I'm coming back to stay. Black River is home. You and Max are home. Kate felt a tear slip down her cheek, but she didn't wipe it away. She smiled, a genuine, radiant smile that transformed her face. We'll be here, she promised. Holding down the fort. Final boarding call for Cleveland, the driver announced, the bus doors hissing pneumatically. Jack picked up his bag. He looked at them one last time, the woman with the badge of gold and the dog with the heart of a lion. He nodded, a silent vow, and turned aboard the bus. He didn't look back as he climbed the steps. He couldn't. Kate and Max stood on the sidewalk as the heavy vehicle pulled away, its tires crunching on the gravel. Max let out one sharp bark, a farewell salute. Kate rested her hand on his head, her fingers burying themselves in his thick fur. They watched until the bus turned the corner and disappeared onto the highway, heading toward the horizon where the gray clouds were finally breaking apart to reveal a patch of brilliant, hopeful blue. The soldier was gone, but the flame he had helped kindle, the flame of justice, of hope, and of a promise made, burned brighter than ever in Black River.